Good morning. Nice to see you all. Did anybody notice something different about the beginning of our service today? No Lord's Prayer. Donna, wonderful, observant. That was intentional because I felt like before we said it another time here, we needed to make sure of two things: that we understand its deep, mystical, and metaphysical meaning. And two, to be sure that the words of the Lord's Prayer don't trigger dualistic thinking in us. Dualistic thinking meaning that we mistakenly think that God is out there somewhere separate from us. I say the Lord's Prayer every morning, and last week I caught myself saying it by rote. And it really startled me, kind of woke me up, so to speak. I realized that I knew it so well and had said it so many times that I was kind of just reciting it, and I wasn't really thinking about what I was saying, much less the effect that it was unconsciously having on me when I didn't think. So, I guess this truth lesson about the Lord's Prayer is mainly to myself. Now, some of you might not be excited about hearing about the Lord's Prayer for 25 minutes. Ministers seem to like that a little bit more than some of the parishioners, I'd say. But before you get too fidgety or maybe decide to have a little nap, I want to share a story that I heard this week. One minister was telling another about a mother who had a fidgety 7-year-old. And that 7-year-old just would not sit still and stay quiet during the church service. So she finally got her son to be quiet one Sunday. But fearing that this wouldn't last, about halfway through the service, she reaches over and tells him, "If you don't stay quiet, the pastor's going to lose his place and start the sermon all over again." It worked. Actually, the Lord's Prayer is a very timely topic. A lot of Unity churches, and I know a lot of you visit Unity churches elsewhere, and a lot of them have quit saying it entirely. The language can trigger dualistic thinking, and it can become so rote that it doesn't even register with people while they're saying it, so why bother? But if properly understood, the Lord's Prayer is profound. It can transform our lives by aligning us with the sacred center of existence, the highest vibrations of life, the non-material ground force of life, the source, the presence, if you will. It helps us live and move and have our being in that source. And that is the point of spirituality. Scholars tell us that the prayer loses a lot in translation from the original Aramaic. I'll certainly have to take their word for that. But some Unity scholars have been working on this recently, and this research has been very, very helpful. The most important thing to keep in mind when you say the Lord's Prayer is not to think literally, but to realize its essence. A lot of us come out of literal fundamentalist or traditional Christian backgrounds, so we are used to taking it more literally. The Lord's Prayer is multi-layered, and the meaning one gets out of it, as with so many spiritual teachings, is primarily depends on the spiritual level of the student, the one saying it. A literal or intellectual approach always lacks depth in the Bible or the Lord's Prayer. The Bible says that Jesus taught on higher levels to those who could understand. He said, "Unto them that hath, it shall be given. To those who hath understanding, deeper teachings will be given. To the uneducated, or those who simply are seeking knowledge and not being, The Bible and the Lord's Prayer only convey a surface spiritual level, maybe morality, which is good in itself, but we're missing out on the richness of it. But if interpreted metaphysically, the deeper spiritual message can be ascertained, and most importantly, can be used in our lives. The exalted meaning of the Lord's Prayer, the sacred prayer, can catapult our ordinary thinking to the higher, more exalted levels of existence. Prayer in general, if done correctly, and not just asking some Santa Claus figure for goodies, is a way to align ourselves with these higher dimensions. It kicks into operation our higher self, which then attracts higher vibrations to us and answers from omniscience, our omniscience. Unity, all New Thought paths, Eastern religions, the Jewish Kabbalah, the Sufi level of Islam, to mention a few, all believe that religion, spiritual paths are non-dualistic. That is, they believe that God is everywhere, including in us. God isn't out there somewhere as a being that we have to petition for our needs and hope that he hears. People who believe that way often get mad and frustrated when he doesn't give them what they pray for. Many leave religion entirely because they feel that God has abandoned them because maybe some prayer didn't get answered. And it's really sad because they're just misunderstanding the whole concept. They are praying for what they already have and don't see. Maybe because it's not in the form that they had imagined. Maybe they pray for the fast red Porsche when they're 18 and God grants them a safe green Ford. Many of us are like the man who searched the entire world for treasure and comes back and finds that it had always been buried right under his house. Taking the Lord's Prayer literally and then getting triggered by some seemingly dualistic language is one of the examples of how our old blind spots can manifest spiritually. We intellectually know that God isn't out there somewhere sitting on a pink cloud with a long beard. We know that. But the wording can contribute to our thinking that way if we don't stay awake. It's almost like we have to do simultaneous translating in order to rewire our brains. But after the rewiring is done, we don't have to be so careful anymore. It's like learning a new language. You know, sometimes at first you translate everything from that language to English. But after a while, you start thinking in that language. So it's just a preliminary step. For example, Our Father, who art in heaven. Now, if we take this literally or without thinking, we could fall into the trap of thinking that we are praying to some distant Father out there in heaven somewhere. But done right, saying Our Father can help us with two important concepts. First, concentrate on the word our. Our Father connotes that we are all one family, every one of us. There is a oneness to all life which we are recognizing. So when we say Our Father who art in heaven, we are acknowledging our oneness with all beings and with this omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence which we call Father or God. And we know that this divinity is already within us. We are simply acknowledging that source, that level of life, and we're acknowledging that it's the same source for every human on planet Earth, regardless of their beliefs or what they're doing. It's kind of like acknowledging electricity that's there for everyone. The house is wired for it, but we have to know that it's there and turn on the switch to utilize it. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within. The potential for all kinds of manifestations of that electricity is there. Not just enough to light one little light bulb hanging in the middle of the room from some pitiful wire or something. We can light our entire house with this electrical source, and everyone's room has access to it. Now, in the original prayer, Jesus used the word Abba for Father, which is an intimate, familiar term in Aramaic. This connotes that Jesus was intimate with the higher forces of the universe. When we say this, we are setting ourselves up to be intimately connected to these higher forces, this part of reality that involves much, much more than just the material world. The material level of life is symbolized by Egypt in the Moses story that we talked about a few weeks ago, for those of you who are here. Remember, Moses freed the chosen people from Egypt, from that material state of mind. That's what we want to do. We want our higher self, our Moses, to free our chosen people, those parts of us that are slaves to material thinking that the material world is the only one. We do this so that we can go to the promised land, symbol of peace, joy, love, and abundance. This is the life we can lead when we commit to that level of living. In the Moses story, the chosen ones make a covenant, remember, with God, Spirit, the Tao, Yahweh, whatever you feel most comfortable calling the source, this eternal wisdom and power of the universe, making a covenant. Hallowed be thy name. This is acknowledging the sacredness of that higher level of life. We hallow, we revere, we bless that exalted part of existence that is in us and is everywhere. You honor the parts of life that are not just materiality. You acknowledge the greatness of it. You allow it to define your being. You deem this higher level of reality superior to materiality. It is sacred, it is holy, and as such, you sometimes make sacrifices for it in order to prove to yourself, to remind yourself that you are devoted to it, so that you can draw on this in your daily life. I make the sacrifice of time to pray every day. Time, that's a good sacrifice. God doesn't need my prayers. I need them. By bowing down and putting my hands together and concentrating on the holy, I remind myself of my commitment to this source of my being and all life. The praying is for me. I am thus better able to become one with this higher state and live accordingly. Remember in the Bible where God asked Abraham to sacrifice his beloved son Isaac? Isaac metaphysically represents that part of us that must be sacrificed, let go of, in order to be reborn as something new. Our firstborn self, so to speak, has to be sacrificed in order to give place to our higher self, our reborn self. Hallowed be thy name means that we so recognize and revere the divine aspects of life that we are willing to let go of, to sacrifice anything that isn't in line with it, like the belief in the purely material plane, for example. That's our Isaac. Hallowed means blessed. We revere and bless this absolute higher level of existence to the point of shedding our firstborn, our Isaac self. The story of Abraham and his being asked to kill his son, by the way, is a perfect example of how the Bible can't be read literally. When interpreted metaphysically, however, it makes perfect sense, like the Hindu Bhagavad Gita about Lord Krishna commanding Arjuna to kill the whole tribe of his relatives, or the inner jihad, that battle between our higher and lower selves in Islam. Every morning, I sacrifice time to pray, and in so doing, I sacrifice who I was. I remind myself of that sacrifice in order to birth who I really am. In the Bible story, at the last minute, remember in the Moses story that God told, in the Abraham story, God told Abraham after he was willing to sacrifice his son, Isaac, God told him he didn't need to carry through with that sacrifice. To be reborn, we don't need to physically sacrifice our vessels either. We are reborn in the same vessel or the same body. The physical plane just isn't what it's about. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. This is just a manner of speech, just to remind us of what already is. God's kingdom has already come. We are that. You are that. We are the kingdom, divinity. We just have to recognize it and remember to turn on the light, so to speak. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within. We don't need to ask for it. The asking is a daily reminder to ourselves that the kingdom is come and that the manifestation of it can be done in our lives if we remember what we are, who we are. We needn't beg for what we already have. This phrase just heightens our awareness of what already is. The holy, the good, the pure are within us and are within every person and everywhere. We are asking in a manner of speech only to remember. What we are really doing is reminding ourselves of our oneness with God and with all of life. We forget. We get distracted, don't we? We fall asleep. This line opens up for us a complete realignment so that God's will can be done, a realignment of ourselves with this divine. Thy will be done means committing to manifesting the higher laws of life, the eternal laws that have always been and always will be everywhere. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's a commitment to align our will with the eternal laws. Heaven is the promised land where Moses, symbol of our higher selves, led those who chose to go. When we give ourselves over to these higher laws of the universe, we too will start seeing the promised land that manifests as health and happiness and peace and unity. And those are all parts of the loveliness of this promised land that we can all enjoy, this ideal state of existence. On earth, as it is in heaven, is an arranged marriage between heaven and earth, arranged by us, a marriage between spirit and matter, which will give birth to our inner Christ. This Christ concept is known as Krishna consciousness in Hinduism, Buddha consciousness in Buddhism, the Tao in Taoism, for example. It's this highest state that all spiritually evolved beings have known about and that we too can access if we just do our part. We must turn on the switch. And saying the Lord's Prayer is one way to find that switch. What's in it for me, you might ask? Entrance to the promised land, that place where everything turns out right. Give us this day our daily bread means several things. Lakma in Aramaic means both physical bread and understanding. Our daily bread represents all of our daily needs. Physical food for our bodies and spiritual food for our souls. It's all bread. Give us this day our daily bread means that we are willing to open ourselves to the wisdom, the food of higher ideas, to be nourished. It's our true sustenance. We've been programmed, most of us have been programmed to think that the material plane is really the only reality, or certainly the most important one. But again, one of the greatest stories ever told is about Moses, who represents that part of us that can free our inner slaves, that part of us that are slaves to the material plane. Our Egypt, that's our Egypt. When we ask for our daily bread, we are asking for what sustains us, all parts of us. And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Here we make an absolute covenant to forgive others and to forgive ourselves. Don't forget that important part. You are part of that oneness of all life. You have to forgive yourself. There could be 10 truth lessons, of course, on that one alone, forgiveness, because we get into all the reasons why we need to forgive. 99% of them are for our own well-being. It's dangerous to allow poisons to remain in us, that disease-producing negativity that unforgiveness creates. And ultimately, as we talk about around here all the time, there's nothing to forgive. We're all just rolling along, acting out our programming, often like toy soldiers, which, when wound up, move in a prescribed way. Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," when he was being crucified. And we should do that too. What's in it for me? Forgiveness dissolves poisonous, life-eating hate and creates inner peace. I've heard it said that a successful person is a good forgiver. Nelson Mandela once said that he was a success in life because of his ability to forgive. Holding poison toward anyone only poisons us. It's self-abuse. Anytime we can't stop thinking about what someone else did, we must realize that we're letting them hold all the power over us. We're slaves to them. We must move on and free ourselves as Moses freed the Hebrews from Pharaoh. Now, metaphysically, Pharaoh is our ego in its most pejorative sense, the part of us that doesn't want oneness with our source, doesn't want oneness with others, because secretly we'd kind of like to be separate and maybe superior. Leave us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now, unity usually says leave. Some of you may have noticed that in the program. We get new people that come all the time and tell us about the misprint in our program. It says leave us not into temptation instead of lead us not, because it's kind of absurd to think that God would ever lead us into temptation. But leave us implies that we don't want to remain in our old state of mind where we are sometimes tempted not to do the right thing, not do the loving thing, the forgiving thing. When in doubt about what the right thing is, it's helpful to refer to such things as the Ten Commandments, the Buddha's Eightfold Path, right aim, right concentration, right livelihood, all the rights. This line is truly a covenant with our higher selves to do what is right. We might be tempted. We might not want to do the right thing at times. That's human, but we do it anyway. The idea is that we are committing to doing the right thing, even when we don't want to. In Aramaic, the language of Jesus, the word for temptation means unripeness. So we want to ripen our ability to live on a higher level. What's in it for me? A perceptive, noticeable, vibratory energy change in us, which exudes purity, honesty, and sincerity, and commands trust and love and respect from others and from ourselves. It also may keep you out of jail. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. This idea is reaffirming the beginning idea that this higher level of life, the kingdom of heaven, the absolute level of life, is and always has been and always will be. It's restating that the material level is not the only level. It is reminding ourselves that the relative plane, the physical plane, the material plane is like Egypt in the Moses story. It's the plane from which we want to free ourselves. It's freeing ourselves of slavery, just like in the Moses story. Like the chosen ones in the Moses story, we may need some convincing from our Moses at first. You ever need to convince yourself to do the right thing sometimes? We all do. And we may later doubt the right thing. That's the doubt that the promised land or the kingdom of heaven even exists. Maybe that's in the form of old temptations, old habits, old programming, which kind of invade us. Metaphysically speaking, when Pharaoh's soldiers are coming at us, we, like the Hebrews, feel trapped between those warriors and the Red Sea. We feel trapped by our old programming, symbolized by the soldiers, and the unknown path, symbolized by the Red Sea. In other words, we may lose our faith sometimes. But when the Hebrews regained their faith in Moses, their higher self, remember the Red Sea parted and they were able to escape. And the Red Sea closed back in on Pharaoh and his soldiers were all killed off. Our old thoughts can be subdued too when we have faith and commit or make a covenant to live on a more exalted level of life. What's in it for me? When I let the kingdom come and the will of heaven be done, I'm free to make it to the promised land, the place of peace and joy and abundance, like Moses' chosen people did in the story. We become the chosen people because we chose to become those people. That's what chosen people means. It's not people that God chose to be saved. It's the people who made the covenant with God and chose to be saved, so to speak, or chose to live on that level and enjoy all that life has to offer. The last idea, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever, is not in the earliest translations. So it was probably not original, but it reinforces the meaning that this higher level of existence is the only one really worth living in. It is restating the idea that this kingdom of heaven is possible and that it's right here on earth. The goodies of the material plane are kind of Maya or illusion by comparison. This line reiterates that you have chosen the high road, which always has been and always will be. It's a validation that you have made the covenant yourself. So today, when we say the Lord's Prayer, during our meditation and prayer time, stay consciously aware of its true meaning and its power to help you recommit spiritually and transform your life. What's in it for you? The promised land of enlightenment, perfect bliss, total abundance. It is possible. It's what you were meant to have and you deserve. Thank you.